everybody. What's up? Welcome to Light After Trauma episode number. I have no idea at this point. So I know that for the last couple episodes, or really since the start of the podcast, I have been giving all of the episodes a number in the show. And I just wanted to let you all know I am no longer going to be doing that. I am not a numbers girl. I am not the girl you want to come to ask for numbers. And at this point, I've lost count. So I'm going to nix the numbers. If you have a question about the numbers, you'll be able to see it in the show notes and on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. But during the episode itself, I'm over giving it numbers because I have no clue. It could be 7. It could be 12. But I am so pumped for today's episode. I have somebody coming on who I greatly admire. Dr. Maria Paredes is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, clinical supervisor, certified eating disorder specialist, and approved IAEDP supervisor, and owner of Three Birds Counseling and Clinical Supervision in Greensboro, North Carolina. A practice that provides services from trauma-informed, fat-positive, sex-positive, LGBTQIA affirming, faith affirming, and social justice affirming lens. She helps individuals of all gender identities make peace with food and their bodies and live fuller lives, free from negative thinking, fear of food, and body hate. She believes all bodies have worth and that all individuals deserve to enjoy food, move in ways that feel joyful, treat their bodies with kindness and gentleness, and experience authentic connection with themselves and others. Maria recognizes that this healing must occur within the individual therapeutic relationship as well as within the larger cultural environment, and thus embraces the role of advocacy and activism. She also works with individuals experiencing anxiety, trauma, infertility, pregnancy loss, and PCOS. Maria teaches courses in UNCG's counseling department and provides clinical supervision and training to new professionals working towards their licensure as therapists or dietitians. Maria is mom to 3 young girls and hopes that they will grow up to experience the wonder and power of all their bodies have to offer, without believing that they must shrink themselves. So, hi, Maria. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Alyssa.
Thank you so much for being here. I am really excited. Is it raining down where you guys are? Like, have you got the hurricane?
It's like overcast, a little sprinkly, but not really raining yet. Yeah.
It is pouring here. So if you all hear rain in the background, hopefully it's soothing for you. Not sure if we'll be able to edit that out, but it is pouring here. I guess these are the remnants of, is it Hurricane Laura? Is that what hurricane we're at?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do? I am a huge fan.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. So I'm a therapist down in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I own a private practice called Three Birds Counseling and Clinical Supervision, and we provide specialized outpatient treatment for eating disorders, body image, anxiety, depression, infertility, pregnancy loss, and trauma. And we do a bunch around hardship evaluations, immigration hardship evaluations. And I've got, I think it's now 6 or 7 of us now, the practice, and I really enjoy it. And then I also teach at a local university. I teach counseling classes to grad students. And yeah, that's what I do.
Holy smokes. That's a big practice. And you've got a lot on your plate.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, the people that I cannot say enough about the folks who work with me, and they're awesome. And so I provide some of them supervision, but they're all pretty competent on their own. So it's neat. It doesn't all fall on me, which is lovely. I love the team that we have.
Yeah, that's great because, I mean, you have all those people under you. You're the founder of Three Birds Counseling. So you are the lead therapist, the owner.
I am, but when I created it, it's funny because I had been toying. I've kind of hopped around in my career a little bit, and some of that's been around like motherhood and just life and interests. And I had toyed with going into private practice for years and years, and I was like studying it and trying to figure out like what's the right way to do it and what's the best way to do it, all in quotes. And I had a lot of fear about like be able to do it. Will I, be able to have a caseload? Like just I think a lot of imposter syndrome kind of fears. And I also knew that in doing it, I wanted to try and do something a little bit different. I wanted to try and embody some feminist approaches to creating it and to having it be something where the people working at the practice, that we're doing something a little bit different and in trying to have, I didn't want them to just be people who were working for me and that they were barely scraping by. I wanted to really help mentor them and help them grow their own voice, grow what they're doing, have them be able to make enough that, I'm sure, in mental health, it can be sometimes hard to make enough to get by. And anyway, so I'm really proud of what we were building together. And I emphasize that like we're building together because I feel like they're all part of the team and that we're working together in some really neat ways.
Right. You brought people along that work with you, not necessarily for you. I mean, technically they work for you, but
they work for me, but they're part of decisions. They're part of shaping it. And I want them to be, I want them to give feedback. I want them to help shape what we're doing. And there's certain things structurally that do end up coming to me, right, in terms of decisions. But I really am intentional about trying to have them be part of what we're doing and how we're offering it to the community.
That's awesome. And is everybody in your practice a certified eating disorder specialist? Because you are, correct?
I am. No, not everyone is. Everyone specializes in eating disorders. And I have full confidence in, we have a new intern. And so she's new and training and learning, but everyone else, I have full confidence in them and the work that they do and giving them any client. They all do a ton with eating disorders. So even though they may not have the certification, they're very competent. Lindsay Umstead, who's Ever Blooming Body on Instagram, she has worked at 2 other residential eating disorder facilities and has also worked in substance abuse. She's done a ton. Melissa Carmona has been doing a ton with eating disorders for a long time. She also does a lot in making it more accessible for Latinx populations. Meredith Nisbet works at another eating disorder treatment facility full-time and then sort of moonlights for us on the side. And she will be getting her certified eating disorder specialist credential. So, and there's others. I mean, no, we're not all certified, but.
But you all specialize in eating disorders.
Eating disorders, and everyone is also trauma informed. Everyone is trained in a specific trauma protocol, at least one. So EMDR, brain spotting, or TFCBT, DBT Act.
Where does the passion for eating disorders come from? So that's something that I specialize in as well. I'm really, really passionate about it. And guys, I'm going to link her Instagram. It's With This Body, right, on Instagram. If you don't follow her already, I tell all my patients to follow you, by the way, because I work with adolescents, and with adolescents, so much of their world is social media. So when they come to me with eating disordered behaviors, one of the first things I say is, well, who are you following on social media? And you are at the top of my list of people to follow because the content that you create is so helpful, and it's something everybody needs to see. So I will definitely link her Instagram handle in the show notes and on the Facebook page, but go follow her With This Body. And you just have a huge, huge passion for eating disorders. It's very clear. So can you talk about like where that comes from?
Sure. Yeah. And it's with _this_body. Cause I think there is someone else who has With This Body without the underscores, but
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. These, like, there's multiple pages out there handle sometimes. So, I'm pretty open about being in recovery myself. And I talk about that with intention and purpose. in destigmatizing. I believe very strongly that it's important to destigmatize mental health and recovery and treatment. And so I'm open about being in recovery myself and having struggled with eating disorder and complex trauma. And so certainly that's a big part of what has drawn me to it. I also, social justice has always been a really important part of, it was an important part of my upbringing and how my parents raised me. And it's also just an important part of the work I do and my beliefs and values. And eating disorder treatment, I think, is very much rooted in social justice work and should be.
Yes. Can you say a little bit more about that? Like what you mean by social justice and how the two are connected? Because
Yeah.
I think that's huge. It's so important.
Yeah. So historically, what most people would think of when we think eating disorders would be the sort of prototype classic image that we would see in movies and TV shows of a thin, white, rich, cisgender, straight female. And it's not that those folks don't struggle with eating disorders too, they do. But what we know increasingly is that the folks who are at most risk for disordered eating and for body image disconnection are anyone who falls into a category of any sort of marginalized identity. And that multi-marginalized folks, so folks who hold multiple marginalizations, are probably at even higher risk for developing eating disorders. And so folks who are queer, folks who are of color, folks who are transgender, non-binary, folks who are undocumented, immigrants, folks who are disabled, anyone who, society, is treated as less than, or who has been made to feel or believe that they are not good enough, or anyone who's been put in a position where they have had to resiliently learn to disconnect from their full self and hide parts of themselves, is at a greater risk of developing eating disorder. So I see eating disorders as, emerging as adaptive, resilient coping strategies for some sort of experience of trauma, some sort of body disconnection. And that can be like an event trauma, right? Like someone who's had a sexual assault or, had an experience that overwhelmed the coping system, but can also be complex trauma. So, across your childhood, experiencing something ongoing, prolonged. It could be something like not having your needs met, right? Experiencing food insecurity, poverty. It could be experiencing being in a home where maybe the parents weren't abusive, but maybe they weren't able to provide that kid with the affirmation and love that they needed. And what happens when a person doesn't feel like they can show up as their full self in the world? Again, oftentimes for important resiliency reasons, right? A person of color who maybe, because it may not always be safe to show their full self. Maybe they have to suppress parts of themselves, or queer person who's living in an area where they're not affirmed or they don't have rights. There's legislation that prevents them from being able to access full rights. Oftentimes there is a need or a desire to suppress parts of themselves to be able to survive. Again, you hear me saying it very intentionally as it's often a resiliency coping strategy. I don't want to pathologize what people have learned to do.
No, it's a way to cope. I mean, eating disorders, I always say like my eating disorder is actually what kept me alive for so long. It really is. It's a lifesaver,
Yeah.
but it also kills you at the same time.
Right. So this is where the work gets really nuanced, right? Like, how do we help people be able to more safely, more integratively live in their body and experience their body in ways where they are able to express and own and exist in their body, in their experience, as they are and as they choose to be, right? Like if they need or want to suppress parts of themselves for whatever reason, I say that because I believe in body autonomy. How do we support that while also understanding that sometimes it's not safe for them to completely be at home in their body? Sometimes, depending on the situation, folks need to continue certain suppression of parts of themselves to be able to show up otherwise in the world. And so that, to me, this work is more than just what I'm doing individually with a client in the therapy room, but it gets at why it's important for me to be an advocate and an activist on a bigger level? How do we help fight racism? How do we help fight transphobia? How do we help break down systems of oppression so that folks don't have to suppress themselves in society?
Absolutely. And I think that the racism, the transphobia, and all of that actually stops people from getting the help that they need. Because when you do think of eating disorders, you do think of somebody who is white, female, anorexic, so thin. But what about the people who don't fall into that category? Personally, I have been through a few different eating disorder treatment centers. And the one thing that I have noticed is that I was the only person there who was struggling with binge eating disorder. And I wonder, everybody else there was white, struggling with anorexia, underweight, and, obviously I am very privileged, but part of me wonders, I know that eating disorders are rooted in social justice, as we talked about. Why are
I guess we should say, yeah, rooted in social injustice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, social injustice, exactly. But I look around and I wonder, well, where are the folks who identify as LGBTQAI, and where are the folks that are in racial minorities? Because these are the folks who are struggling probably the most with eating disorders, and yet I don't see a lot of them speaking about it.
Well, I think, I think that's changing. And a couple of things that I just want to throw in, like, I heard you say, folks who are anorexic, smaller body. A lot of people don't know that you can have anorexia and be higher weight. And so what we typically think of anorexia, what we've historically been taught about it, was that it was just folks who are low weight. And you can have anorexia and be higher weight. A lot of people don't realize that. Even the fact that we name anorexia and higher weight bodies as atypical is a misnomer, because it's actually more typical for people with anorexia to be higher weight. We have more people who are higher weight that are anorexic than people who are lower weight and anorexic.
Yep.
And same with BED, and same with all the eating disorders. You cannot tell what disorder they meet just by looking at them. So in terms of like hearing more about eating disorders from diverse lenses, there are so many more voices out there now, and I think that's incredible. And there's a lot more movement happening to try and increase care. Just this past week, my colleague Anna Lutz and I do supervision groups for dietitians and therapists. And one of the things that we are noticing, and it's a small change just in this small sphere, but is that the case presentations that our providers are bringing to the table for their case presentations are increasingly more diverse and representing cases that are representing people with marginalization. Whereas in the past, it would continue to be the same classic case of, a thin white rich girl in her 20s, and I think that's a great thing. And there are more. I don't think that, it's fair for us, and especially us right here as white women, to say like, where have they, this like sort of abstract they been. Like, I think it's more that how have voices not been heard? It's not that voices weren't talking about it. I think it's that a lot of us weren't.
Right. It's that they don't feel like they don't feel like that help is available to them.
I think there's a lot of folks that don't feel help is available to them. And I think that for those of us who are white, I think we need to do a better job of listening, because I think there have been many folks who have come asking for help, asking for treatment, showing up with symptoms, but that us providers, especially maybe us white providers, haven't maybe been as attuned to understand how symptomology might look different.
Yes.
For sure, I think there's a lot of folks who may not feel safe and able to, or just able financially or otherwise, to be able to go and receive care. But I also think there's been a lot of folks who have gone in and we've missed it, right? We haven't known maybe as much what to look for. Maybe we're looking just for what we've always thought to look for. And I think part of what's changing is that people are understanding that our assessment process, right? Picking up on, oh, hey, this person who's coming in for treatment in this college counseling center or wherever, oh, maybe it's not that we need to send them to the dietitian and encourage weight loss. Maybe we need to assess for what else might be going on, that maybe there's disordered eating and body image going on. Maybe the way that someone describes their eating disorder is different than how we've always heard from other people.
And that's why conversations like this are so important, because as two white women, when we have a client in front of us, as non-biased as we try to be, it's insidious. It's very sinister and it's very subtle and it's very hard to not be biased. And I think it's important to bring awareness to it, to clinicians, to non-clinicians, to everybody, that we do need to change the way that we are assessing, because eating disorders don't always look like your thin, white, rich girl in her 20s, like you said.
And, there's a local university here. It's a HBCU, Historically Black College University. And I've gone there to present on eating disorders at least a couple of times. And I was supposed to go pre-pandemic, and now everything has been moved. But the messaging I would get at different points was, we don't have eating disorders here. And I think it's a mix of things. One, I think there's difficulty for folks in just coming forward to talk about any kind of issue sometimes. In some Black communities, again, I don't want to talk in generalizations about all Black communities, but sometimes there's more stigma, there's lack of access. My partner worked there for several years in their counseling center, and the kind of outreach that they needed to do was very different than the outreach that we would do at PWIs, predominantly white institutions. And a lot of that was a function of, one, there being fear of going to talk to someone who was seen as a person with power or authority. It was, there was stigma about mental health. You don't go talk to a counselor. You maybe go talk to your pastor. You go talk to your family, but don't open up to some stranger. And then, so that was just about mental health in general. But then when you drill down to eating disorders, it was even more seen as something that's a white person problem. That's not something that we deal with. And what's been interesting is just in recent years, how it's changing and how they're having more students come forward and saying, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. And they're, I think, understanding more. I'm saying they, the counseling center there, understanding more that how they need to assess for that and what it might look like differently.
That's amazing. It's amazing that people are open to that change, that they're recognizing it. I love that change is happening. It's on the horizon. And I love, I do work with adults, but I primarily work with adolescents. And I just feel like this is the generation that's going to change the future. They're going to change the whole world, because they understand so much more about privilege than so many other people. And they are creating some serious change. And I love it.
Yeah. It's everything's changing. Our language, our way of understanding things. And it's something that I've had to really continue to check myself on, to remember, what do I not know? What do I know? What do I not know that I don't know? The levels of knowing, and how to stay humble enough to know that there's something that I'm probably missing, that there's harm that I'm probably doing, even unintentionally,
without knowing it. And that is, I think, one of the best gifts that you can give not only yourself, but the world, is to sort of humble yourself, because as people of privilege, we're going to mess up. And you have to be open to constantly checking yourself and asking yourself, well, is this okay that I'm saying this? Or is it okay to have this thought? Or what is this rooted in? And I think it's so important just to try to drop your defenses and just listen and be open to hearing what racial minorities, sexual minorities have to say.
Yeah, totally.
And as we listen to them, they need to lean less on their eating disorders as a coping skill, because there's less of them that they need to hide from the world.
as young people come forward and say they have eating disorders? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, as we continue to listen to people who have been victims of social injustice, and as we continue to help them and support them, the less I believe that they will need to lean on their eating disorders to cope. Does that make sense?
I think so. And something that I've been trying to, that I try to continue to be aware of is to really sort of one down myself of my role is not to come in as the white savior or to even assume that I know what they need, so maybe recovery in the way that I've experienced it myself or the way that I offer it to some of my clients may not be what others might need. And so how, I don't know if I'm making sense, but just really trying to kind of even deconstruct the idea that the goal is to get any group of people to heal in the same way, to be in the same way. Maybe some of the things that we pathologize as, maladaptive, maybe they're not maladaptive in other cultures or other communities. And so,
right.
So yeah, so that sort of one downing, this is an old reference, but kind of like the Columbo, really kind of assuming there's stuff I don't know here. And how do I, instead of coming in going, okay, let me support you and let me fix it and let me have the answer. How do I go, how can I do less harm? How can I provide more access, support access? How can I even know that maybe I'm not the person or the provider that's the right fit? So how do I support other providers be able to provide care who may better fitted to do it than myself?
Right. Exactly. And now you are a mom as well, right? Another role that you play.
Yes, I have 3 little ones, and it is hard times during the pandemic.
I bet. So how old are they?
So I have 2 kids in grade school, and I have a kid in preschool.
You have little ones.
Yes, and they're awesome, and it's a lot of work right now, especially because our schools are all virtual right now, and so we're just being home.
Oh my gosh. Now, is there a certain way that you raise your kids differently when it comes to eating and food, different than the way that you were raised to help them develop a normal and healthy relationship with food?
So I think it's really important to teach kids to be fat positive. We try to talk about bodies in, at minimum, neutral ways, but also positive ways, not just talking about fat bodies neutrally, but talking about fat bodies positively, right? And and to deconstruct that fat is not a bad thing or something to be afraid of. And in the same way, I really want to teach my kids that they don't have to be afraid of food. They don't have to be, that we don't have to elevate certain foods over others, and that it's important to enjoy food. And so, we generally follow the division of responsibility by Ellen Satter, which is we decide the what, where, and when. They decide whether they're going to eat it all and how much to eat. I say generally because, as with anything parenting, sometimes you're just surviving and doing what's working in that moment, and certainly break all the rules that I try to follow at times. But even that to me is important too. I don't want to be the perfect parent. I don't want to teach my kids that I'm perfect or that we're always following things in exactly the same way. I think some structure is important, but I want them to know that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be human. Mommy makes mistakes. Poppy, their dad, makes mistakes. And so we try to model neutrality around food and body. And, some of the concretes of those, you see me being pretty free and open about my body in front of them. It's been interesting as they're getting older, how that shifts. My oldest is like, Mom, put some clothes on. I'm in my bedroom. Leave me alone.
Right, exactly. About teaching them also that bodies are not inherently sexual.
Right. And, yes. And, they're growing up and becoming, they are sexual beings. And so it's been interesting sort of exploring I'm trying to do this body, neutrality thing. And they're figuring out their own stuff. And so sometimes they're like, oh, Mom, it's so gross. Like, why don't you feel your armpits? Or like, why don't I think having some lightness around it and some humor and just conversations, are really important. And I love that my kids already know that it's unfair to treat bodies differently, that when they see something that is fat phobic, that they're able to recognize it and say, Mom, that's not fair. That's not cool. And I think that's really neat. Like, I'll get asked folks like, well, what age should we start talking about this? Or, are we going to scare them? Like, no, just talk directly about it. Have conversations and mess up and,
Yes.
expose and just dialogue about it. That's what's going to help the most.
Yeah. And it's what helps keep shame out of your house, because shame is the ultimate silencer. And there's so much shame around eating and bodies. And so that's amazing. It's amazing that you're doing that. It's tough work.
It is. It's not always, I make lots of mistakes, and it's neat too. Like even my kids, my oldest is way better at things like even remembering pronouns, or even like initiating conversations around like not assuming pronouns. And I love that. I love that, kids can, we think, oh, this is so hard and how are we going to all change? And it's like, oh my gosh, kids, like these little kids can get it. I think we can as adults.
They're doing it. They're going to change the whole world.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, I love that. I love that. Now, if somebody wanted to find your practice, would they just go right to your website, which is 3birdscounseling.com?
Website's 3birdscounseling.com. You can spell out the word 3 or just, type in the number 3. And then, like the Instagram, it's with this body, with _the _body. So, yeah.
Perfect. And I am going to, like I said, guys, I will link her website and her Instagram in the show notes and on the Facebook page. So you will have access to that. Thank you so much.
Oh,
I love talking about this stuff. It's tough. It's so tough to talk about, but it's so important. So thank you so, so much.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information on today's discussion and to sign up for the Light After Trauma newsletter, head over to my website at alyssascolari.com. Also be sure to check out my Instagram for additional tips and resources at Alyssa_Scolari_LPC. Thanks again for listening and take good care.